those who have been clinically dead and came back. What did you see? Story 1. I was bleeding to death from an upper GI bleed. I felt like I was slowly shedding my ego, and the anxiety that I held constantly was going away. Like I remember thinking that nothing on earth was my problem anymore. I was becoming part of the universe in a million different ways, and it was beautiful. Meanwhile, an EMT was screwing something into my humerus to give me blood and fluids, which is supposed to be very painful because it pushes stuff out of the way inside the bone intraosseous access. I didn't feel it at all, or the pain and sickness. I was above it all, aware but not watching. I am glad though that I was resuscitated because life is good now. Thank you to EMTs and people who give blood. Story 2. Blackness with maybe a growing white haze in one corner of the blackness. It's not really what I saw but what I felt, the most intense feeling of peace you could imagine. Story 3. Accidental OD as a kid. Keep your prescriptions locked up away from kids. My heart stopped. I remember just darkness, but I don't remember being afraid or anything, just peaceful and warm. It was the most peaceful thing I have ever experienced. If anything exists beyond that peaceful darkness because the doctors resuscitated me. But if that's all there is after the meat suit shuts down, I'm okay with it. Story 4. Briefly been dead on 2 occasions, both times at the hospital, saw nothing. Only notable difference between being just regular unconscious and dead was the complete lack of continuity. After waking up, I had no sense of time passed, despite still being in the same room, surrounded by the same people. If you told me I had been gone for 5 hours, days, months or years, I would have believed you in those very first seconds. Went back to normal rather quickly though. Story 5. Was declared medically dead for 3 minutes 11 seconds as a 15 years old who ended up getting meningococcal years ago at a house party. I remember being on a beach sitting on a wharf with my feet in the water chatting to my older brother who was alive and well. I was big into Final Fantasy X back then and it almost felt like my interpretation of the said beach. Felt like forever we were doing this. Then I felt actual water on my feet and I woke from a long coma because somebody was in my hospital room and had spilt water over me. I just remember how foul my mouth felt and tasted as I started regaining my senses. Story 6. Nothing. Know how even when you're asleep and know you're sleeping or at least know you're dreaming, it's like a blink. One moment you're driving home, then you blink, you open your eyes, you're in a hospital with 24 broken bones. Story 7. This was in 2021. I caught COVID a second time and I recovered initially. 10 days later I could barely breathe and wound up in the ICU. I don't remember much, but I remember people in those CDC suits scrambling around me and a doctor telling me they were going to give me some experimental drug, and the next thing I know everything is black and I'm falling. And it was warm and comfortable, like when I was a kid watching a movie right before I fell asleep on the couch. I felt safe, I felt relaxed, and for the first time in years, I felt at peace and just knew that I was dying and this was it and it was okay. And then I heard my son calling for me. I remember this white-hot rage just start burning in my chest, painful but focused. I started fighting that feeling and felt myself stop falling down and slowly start falling upwards. Then I'm blinking and there's the doctor telling me how happy he was to see me awake. And the staff looked happy as well. I don't remember leaving the hospital, or how long I was there, but waking up at home, this still keeps me up at night. Story 8. I wasn't clinically dead, but I was involved in a drunken car accident. When I was 17, I was the passenger coming back from a party. The driver was intoxicated. We had a head-on, on a back road in the country, and it took 45 minutes for police, fire and ambulance. First, I'd like to say that I was raised by hippie parents who are against most forms of religions and government organizations. Never once was I taught about God or went to church except for my cousin's weddings. When I came to, I was in a dark space. I saw a man who was roughly 2 stories high looking down on me. In his hands he held a urn vase type implement with long golden handles that met at an opening. As I looked up at him, he began to pour a clear fluid over me from the urn. Immediately I felt cold and had the shivering sensation. It was thicker than water but similar in appearance. After a few moments I asked what he was doing. He said he was cleansing me. As I looked up again to reply, I saw he had turned the urn upside down and brought it down on top of me. After this, all I saw was blackness, but I felt as though people were around me waiting. Suddenly I realized I must be dead. I started to panic and think no, this can't be. I didn't want to die. I started to feel my body tilt, and instead of being upright I felt as though I was now hovering at a 45-degree angle. I then thought, if I'm dead, where is God? In the far distance I saw a pinprick of light like a star in the night sky. I then felt myself slightly pulled towards this object as if I was a magnet. I took a deep breath in and noticed I began to move forward once more. Now I began to continuously breath in and out, each time accelerating the pull. Now I started to feel waves rolling over me of absolute love, which gave me a goosebump feeling. It felt greater than any mother's love possible. This continued until I was inches away from the light, which now appeared as a glowing perfect sphere or orb. I felt tears of joy and I desperately wanted to become one with the light. The light spoke and said, love everyone and love everything. Have no fear. However, just as I was about to merge touch it, I woke up to another passenger in the back seat kicking me in the face as they tried to exit our rolled vehicle. My first thoughts coming to was that I wanted to go back there, and that this world wasn't real. Story 9. It's possible I nearly died during surgery a few years ago. From what I was told, I came super close to doing so. Anyway, I just recall standing in a white void, being able to see my own feet planted firmly on the floor and having this overwhelming feeling of warmth, comfort and peacefulness. I also recall still feeling like myself, and I had the ability to remember some memories, but only a limited amount of them. It was such an odd and unforgettable experience. Story 10. Not me, but my dad, who grew up a strict then lapsed Catholic, but still believes there is something, told me rather candidly, "I saw nothing, just black." That was during the 9 minutes my mother, a former St. John ambulance officer, pounded his chest to get his heart restarted. That was 13 years ago. Dad turned 93 in February. Story 11. I don't think I was clinically dead, but this is the closest I've ever been. Hey, race my experience. I was a teenager trying to install a headphone port on my old TV. I knew the cathode tube could store up to 30,000 volts of electricity, and touching it could kill me instantly. So I made sure to unplug the TV and then tried to switch it on to fully discharge the tube before working inside it. I installed the port, welded the cables, and switched on the TV to test it. It didn't work. I switched it off, unplugged it, tried to turn it on again while unplugged to discharge it, and checked the connections. Everything seemed fine. I welded the cables again to make sure they were properly connected. Then, I plugged the TV back in, switched it on, and tested it. Still nothing. I realized I would have to test it while it was on to get immediate feedback. So, I started touching the cables with a screwdriver while the TV was running. The handle of the screwdriver was plastic, and when the tip touched one of the cables, suddenly I got sound. I could hear the TV through the headphones. I just needed to weld that cable better. I tried to push the cable itself with a screwdriver, but holding it from the back made it difficult. To get a bit more stability, I put my index finger on the metallic part of the screwdriver. The moment my finger touched the metallic part, I saw a bridge of light, as thick as my pinky finger, jump from the TV tube to the tip of the screwdriver. I heard a loud noise, and the force of it, combined with the shock, made me jump backward. I landed on my bed, face up, staring at the ceiling. I couldn't see anything. Everything was white. I wasn't blind, but it felt like looking directly at the sun, even with my eyes shut. I don't remember how long I was like that. I don't know if I lost consciousness. Eventually, shadows started forming on the ceiling. I began recognizing the light in my room and the shapes of my curtains. Then I heard a distant rattling sound, like a child's toy slowing down. The rattle grew closer and slower until it sounded like a drum. Pum pum pum. It became more stable. That's when I realized. The sound was my heart. I could see clearly again. My ceiling, my room, everything was back to normal. After that, I closed up the TV, tested it, and it was working fine. I never tried to open or touch the inside of a TV again. Story 12. I was resuscitated twice, and I can't say that what I saw was at those moments, but over the course of a few days that I was in a medically induced coma. So a lot of this could be considered dreams or hallucinations, but for what it's worth, I'll write what I can remember. Even immediately after waking up, all of this was very blurry, and as time has passed it's even harder to remember specifics, but I remember being in a very odd landscape. Just moving my eyes or head would cause massive changes. For example, long corridors turning into mountains, then into large flat plains. Someone I know that's done DMT said that this could be seeing higher dimensions, but I'm not sure. I don't remember geometric shapes or colors. Just a mind-boggling landscape I couldn't make heads or tails of. I do know I wasn't alone and that there was something else there that I was friendly with at times and also absolutely terrified of at times. It's all very vague, and I'm not sure if it was the same entity or not at all times, but it seemed like it. There was also an incredible feeling of nostalgia, like I knew this entity and hadn't seen them in a very long time, not sure what to make of it. I don't consider myself religious, so this is no claim to have seen God or anything, just that I interacted with someone or something. All I do know is the experience has made me immensely afraid of what comes after this life. I've always been more interested and curious to the afterlife, if there even is one, but now it's so scary to me that even the thought of it gives me a surreal chill down my spine, an instinctual fear you could say. And when I say I was terrified of this thing, I mean like a complete and unquestionable terror. If I had been capable of it, I would have lost all bladder and bowel control. I remember screaming and screaming, then just as quick the feeling of being around old friends. The very strange and unforgettable feelings, while also being completely unable to remember any specifics of anything that happened, just make me wonder even more about what it means to be alive or dead. But anyhow, that's what little insight I have on it. From what I've read and talked with other people about, it seems number 2 people have the same experience, and I ultimately think I hallucinated or dreamt most of this up. There's a natural process in the human brains that essentially dumps DMT into you when you're dying or near death, so I just assume that's what leads to most people's experiences. Story 13. For those of you that relate to the post, feel free to check out this podcast episode. Dr. Jeffrey Long has studied people who've had near-death, out-of-body, and revived experiences for most of his adult life. He has a website that allows people to share their testimonies, all for the sake of research and understanding. Story 14. Was in status ellipticus and alone in my apartment. Should have died then. Everything was peaceful, like you don't have a body, but you know everything about the space around you. There is no uncertainty. There is a presence everywhere, and you're part of it. One thing I found strange is that it doesn't matter if it's light or dark. It's the presence that matters. And death is nothing more than a gateway or guide to something beyond. But you must wait for your time. Woke up afterwards, with that experience still burned into my subconscious, while my brain was still rebooting, trying to get my memories back. Story 15. I work in the ICU as a nurse, so I think perhaps I can give a better insight than most in this topic. Long story short, most people say after we get ROSC, return of spontaneous circulation, and have been extubated, their experience after a code blue, aka when their heart has completely stopped they experience a complete blackout. There's some that do say it's a very deep sleep and they just woke up like they had a nightmare. No one has ever told me though that they have seen some sort of white light or an indication what some movies portrays. Story 16. I saw a different realm that in my experience a classic NDE, I guess you could say was much closer to actual reality than this one. My earthly existence seemed strangely two-dimensional in comparison afterwards. It would take a few pages to describe it, but suffice to say I don't fear death at all after what I experienced. Story 17. I gassed myself in my garden shed. Don't know how long I was dead for, but my smartwatch activated the false sensor alert and I was revived by paramedics. Didn't see anything, but I was devastated when I realized I'd been revived. It was like being very rudely awoken from a deep sleep. Story 18. I had a near-death out-of-body experience. Although it wasn't in a clinical setting, it was from an unintentional drug overdose. Full disclosure, I'm a heroin addict with over 5 years clean. I remember thinking immediately after dosing that I'd done too much. It came on too quick and I can remember the second before everything faded and then nothingness. I recall freaking out in my mind because I couldn't perceive my body or any of my senses. I remember clearly being scared and confused and then had a realization that I was oding and that I must be dying close to death. I then began to realize I could see my own body slumped in my car from above like I was looking through my window on a ladder. I remember clearly screaming for help and that I didn't want to die, that this wasn't how I wanted my family to find me. I also remember a floating, calm feeling once the realization that I was dying hit me. It felt like I was surrounded by waves of peacefulness. I'm not really sure how else to describe it. Maybe it was acceptance. I also remember perceiving a lightish blue light, not unlike seeing it at the end of a tunnel. Being above my own body and seeing it while also realizing I was still aware of my own consciousness confused me, and I then started calling for my mom to help me, because I didn't want to die the wrong way and get stuck somewhere. My mom had died a few years prior. It might sound crazy, but then I remember the feeling I would get as a kid when I'd hug my mom. I liken it to her hearing me and coming to help. I kept saying I didn't want to die yet, and then I felt like I was given a choice to move forward or to go back. I chose to go back. Then everything I just described started to fade and the next thing I remember is feeling my fingers on my right hand twitching and being sweaty. Then I realized I could feel my own breath again and knew I was back in my body. I started breathing heavily and crying as I opened my eyes and realized I was back in my body. I took a couple minutes to compose myself. My whole body felt exhausted and worn out. I drove home crying and yelling at myself the whole way. I got and stayed clean a few months after that thanks to getting sent to jail for a few months. I've always been into woo stuff and things like UFOs. My experience still sticks with me. I think about it quite often and has led to a realization that there's definitely a spiritual other side of life and consciousness after we die. I can't dismiss it by saying it was just the drugs. Anyone who's been an addict will tell you heroin isn't like that. Plus I was aware and perceiving my own body from above and having conscious thoughts through the whole experience. Sorry if this is too long. This is my experience and I'm certain it was as real to me as I'm typing this now. There's a whole lot to consciousness and life we don't understand. Hope you don't think I'm too crazy. Story 19. My mom was allergic to bees. She got stung several times while working outside. It took a few minutes for them to bring her back. She said it was nothing. No pain, no fear, no sadness or regret. She didn't feel her body or see anything. Not even darkness, just nothing. She was a religious person, and I really hope she got to go to whatever she thought afterlife is. Maybe the nothing place was just like a waiting room. Story 20. Not me, but my grandfather. He had a heart attack. He said he felt like he fainted, and then he was all warm and happy like everything was going to be okay. Everything was black, but he saw a faint light far away. He said that it felt like either he floated towards it or it floated to him, he doesn't know, and the light turned into a porch from his childhood home where his mum was sitting in a rocking chair. She had been dead for 10 years at that time. He was so happy to see her. She looked at him and smiled and said, "Not right now, love," and then he woke up in the ambulance. Story 21. Got in a head-on bike collision when I was 23. I remember adrenaline kicking in and quickly realized I couldn't move, kind of freaked out, and then just waited. No pain, no feelings, no tears. It was around 12 p.m. so I do remember the blinding sunlight. I closed my eyes and woke up in the hospital the next day. Apparently, I died from a heart attack on the way to the hospital and was resuscitated, TBH. The worst thing from that was waking up and feeling like hungover and beat up at the same time. Wouldn't recommend scaring your mom in her birthday month like that. Story 22. I don't know if I was ever clinically dead, but I will tell you a quick story about me. I got into a pretty spicy car accident and spent the night in a ditch before waking up and calling an ambulance. Everything was pretty fuzzy for a bit. I remember being loaded into a helicopter, being in a hospital bed, people going in and out. I smashed my face into the dashboard, so they had to pull pieces of my skull out of my brain. It was a Catholic hospital or something, so before I went into brain surgery they asked if a priest could come talk to me. I didn't care, so I said, "Yeah, that's fine, send him in." I remember some of what this guy said, but what really stands out to this day was him talking about how great God is. Specifically him saying, "You're going into a pretty dangerous surgery, but when you come back, I want you to remember that feeling of waking up and knowing how much God loves you." Anyway, something happened in the surgery, and I guess my heart stopped and they had to counteract the drugs they used to put me under, which also counteracted the painkillers. I woke up blind and in the worst pain of my life while it felt like people were holding me down. So I think that was a sign that I am going to when I finally get my ticket punched, and that was what will be like. Story 23. My dad experienced this 12 years ago during cardiac arrest. He said there are no words to describe it and beautiful doesn't come close. He won't quite say it, but I think he wishes he didn't come back solely due to how great it was. He said when his real time comes he will have no regrets and he knows he's going to 100 be at peace. He has talked about it a few times and makes it sound downright exciting. Story 24. My great-grandfather R.I.P. Pop died for a few minutes when getting his pacemaker replaced. I'll never forget him telling me, everything was purple and I didn't hurt anymore, then those brought me back. Story 25. Don't know if I was clinically dead but I was close to it. 7,440 BP plummet due to dehydration during cancer treatment, and that value is after I woke up and already on fluids. In short, when I went under, we were on our way to an infusion clinic, felt nauseous, heaved, and then lost consciousness. Saw a light brown color, the sun diffusing through my eyelids, felt like I was suspended in fluid and totally disconnected from my body, no actual input from the rest of my body. The defining component was an overwhelming feeling of peace, like nothing else mattered, and this was my reward for suffering for several months straight. I was ready and I was completely okay if this was it, despite my 2-year-old daughter, my wife, and everything else I was leaving behind. I'm ashamed of that feeling somewhat because it's not who I am, but in that moment, apparently that is what I needed to feel. Short answer is that it was the highest on life I've ever been while dying. I had such an aura of effect on me that it completely resolved my lifelong anxiety for almost 7 to 8 years. 1010 would have an NDE again. Edit. I forgot an important part. During treatment I gained a very strong case of tinnitus. It was incessant and still is to this day. I don't remember what silence is, but when I went under, everything went silent. No tinnitus at all, dead silence. That may very well have been my last thought before I woke up in the ER. Story 26. Near-death experiences. This is a site where people from all around the world describe what they experienced on the other side. It also gives their age, where they're from, what happened to nearly cause them pass. Edit typo. Story 27. Nothing. You know how they say you see a light? That ain't true. I couldn't see a thing. Everything just faded to black. Came back about 3 minutes later according to my wife. It was like there was no sense of time. Those 3 minutes felt like they could have been 2 seconds or 2 years. Story 28. My biological father said everything was dark and cold for him when he coded. He said he met his grandma and was able to give details and things that they talked about. I remember when he spoke to his mom and he told her everything he's seen and spoke about, she was as in disbelief and pale as a ghost. My biological father never met his grandma because she passed away, but overall very interesting. Story 29. I had an operation when I was 21 for gyno stuff. I ended up with golden staph. I'm 55 now. I went back into hospital and not sure what happened, but I think I died. Long story short, I walked up the biggest spiral staircase I've ever seen. It was a long way up, but every step I took I felt calmer and more peaceful. There was white light all around me, almost hugging me. I finally got to the top and a dude was standing there. I want to say it was St. Peter. I only think that because I went to Catholic schools. Anyway, I was standing next to him. He had a white robe on, white hair with a long beard and a staff in his right hand. He turned and looked at me, put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Go back. It's not your time yet." I have never felt more peaceful or happier. It was beautiful in a way words can't describe. My next thought was, oh, now I have to walk back down all these stairs. I woke up with nurses all around me, shaking me, talking to me, etc. I felt amazing and I'm not scared to die. Story 30. My uncle as a kid drove his bike off a cliff and was pronounced dead. Woke up freezing cold in cold storage. Kept yelling for a blanket. Never asked him if he saw anything. Pretty sure he was probably just in a coma when they found him. Story 31. I underwent surgery, and during the operation, I felt like I had died. It was as if I was flying at a steady speed through a kind of huge tunnel or cave. There was bright light shining at the end of the tunnel, but I felt like I could never reach that light. It's just there, shines with a warm light. The walls of this cave were lined with countless cables in black, red, and blue, stretching endlessly in every direction. As I moved forward, I glanced to the sides and saw these infinite cables accompanying me along the way. The whole scene had a cyberpunk-like feel to it. While soaring through this tunnel, I felt completely bodilessly my consciousness was moving forward. That was the moment I realized I was dead. But the only thing that truly hurt me was the regret I hadn't had the chance to say goodbye to my parents, my friends, to spend just a little more time with them, to explain my situation, and to let them know how much I appreciated them. I felt sad that I hadn't been able to say a proper farewell, especially to my mother. But after a short while, a sense of acceptance washed over me. I came to terms with it. I told myself that they would forgive me for leaving without a word, that they would be okay, that they were in good hands, and that eventually we would meet again. This brought me peace, a feeling of tranquility, happiness, and an overwhelming sense of contentment that's hard to put into words. I was at peace. As I continued flying through this strange, timeless place, I suddenly saw stars, huge, bright stars, so many of them. And I was so excited. Wow, these are the most beautiful stars I've ever seen. I was beyond thrilled that, after what felt like an eternity of emptiness, I was finally seeing something and it was breathtaking. I felt pure joy and happiness. Then, out of nowhere, I heard my mother's voice calling my name. I couldn't quite make out what she was saying after that, but I knew it was her. What was actually happening in that moment was that I had been moved to the pediatric ward after surgery. The ceiling above me was decorated with simple illustrations of stars, some kind of a childish painting. Those were the exact same stars I had seen. And I screamed of happiness. I screamed, "I see stars, Mom." At that moment, I still felt like I was flying through the tunnel, watching the stars in the distance. But in reality, I was already waking up. I just hadn't fully realized it yet. My mother was standing beside me, talking to the nurse and the doctor. It took me a few minutes to process that the stars I was seeing were just simple drawings, but the happiness I felt when I saw them, that pure satisfaction of finally seeing something after so long in the void, I had never been happier in my life, and I probably never will be. Maybe it was because I realized that there was still a chance I was alive. Or that I was arriving somewhere where people were waiting for me, or that someone was calling me back, and then, all at once, my nervous system came back online, and the post-surgery pain hit. Story 32. My mother was in the hospital with throat cancer. She had just signed a DNR that I guess wasn't on file yet because she passed in her sleep that night, but the nurse who was doing the rounds responded and brought her back. She ended up getting released to come home and spend her final days with the family. When she was at home, I was really curious and asked her about dying and coming back. She said she remembered hearing the nurse coming in to check on her. Then she had vivid dreams of her parents and a feeling of being at peace before waking up in ICU. She mentioned there was no pain and no suffering, just an immense feeling of peacefulness. That talk helped me a bit with the grieving process, as she died 2 weeks later peacefully in her sleep at home. Knowing that there was no big traumatic event or pain was nice. Story 33. I'm seeing a lot of people say nothing blackness. If you don't believe in souls, I'm guessing that makes perfect sense, but even for those who do believe in souls, it still makes sense, right? Our earthly, human brains log the experiences we have in this body. The soul would experience log things differently. So it wouldn't see the way that eyes do or remember the way that a brain does, etc. I don't really know where to go from here, but just thought I'd share in case anyone else wants to chime in. Story 34. I drowned when I was younger. I saw nothing. I remember struggling to get to the surface. I couldn't swim and the feeling of panic and fear. Then I remember swallowing water and how much it hurt. Then a moment of calmness where I stopped moving. The pain stopped and everything was quiet. Then nothing. Didn't see anything, didn't hear anything. Story 35. I was clinically dead for 3 minutes while having all 4 of my wisdom teeth removed. It happened right after they gave me the anesthesia. I saw nothing, it was just black. Right before I felt super dizzy. Everything was spinning. Thought I was on a roller coaster that was gonna derail into the high sky down to the ground. Then I woke up to the nurse screaming that I was flatlining and to get the doctor. I then projectile vomited all over the surgeon as soon as he walked in. I was overdosed on more anesthetic, and then before I knew it I was awake and recovering. Story 36. I just want to say that this comment section has made me feel so much better about my father's death last May. He died from complications with pneumonia after beating cancer. I know he was in pain, but reading all these comments about warmth and peacefulness has honestly helped comfort my mind a lot. I hope you are all alright, and thank you for all for sharing your stories. And now I am crying. Story 37. A God I didn't believe in, who asked if I wanted to stay in heaven or go back down. Asked to come down to be with my daughter. Woke up on a helicopter. Felt the biggest feeling of peace, love and forgiveness. True perfection. It was beautiful. Story 38. This isn't about me. It's about my grandma. According to my mom, apparently my mom went to visit my grandma who had several issues: cancer, kidney failure, etc. When she got there, my GMA told her I just had the most beautiful dream, but I can't describe it. There were colors we don't have the names for, they don't exist, and I felt better than I ever felt before. And my sister was there. Her sister had passed away years earlier. A few more descriptions I don't remember. Anyway, they chatted for a couple hours like normal. When my mom was ready to leave, the doctor stopped her in the hallway and said she's a lucky lady. We lost her for over a minute, but she came back. I haven't told her yet because she seems to be in good spirits. I know people are going to say DMT, but I've experimented with hallucinogens, including DMT, seen some crazy, but never made up colors. I also have a couple more similar stories that are kinda hard to explain with logic. Story 39. I died once. My heart stopped. Just stopped beating. No anxiety, no worries, no nothing. Just a big void. Nurses brought me back, but this is the way to go. Story 40. I saw my grandma and baby brother, who passed at 17 months old. They were in a meadow and across a stream. When I was walking towards them, I marveled at the luxurious colors of everything. The grass, the wild flowers, the sky, etc. Everything was a brilliant hue I'd never seen before. I could literally smell every flower in the water. When I stepped into the stream, she said, "Hito, it's not your time yet. You still have a long time. You have to back." I said, "I don't want to. I'm a loser. I'm fat and ugly. I'm divorced. I have a drug addiction. I don't want this life anymore." She said, "It's not up to us." I said, "Who is it up, Jesus?" She said, "You already know who." I said, "I don't." I said, "Is heaven what we think it is?" She said, "Nothing we've ever imagined comes close." I said, "Is it beautiful?" She said, "It's glorious." Then she said, "Go back, Hito, it's time, and don't be afraid, we will be waiting for you when it's the right time." The right time, WF. Anyway, I opened my eyes just as the doctor was going to give me the paddles. We lost for a few seconds, buddy. I said, "I know my grandma said I had to come back." He kinda snickered. I have another story if anyone's interested. Story 41. Never been dead. But after an OD, I experienced what I think might have been close. I remember it feeling like all of a sudden I was incredibly conscious of the act of maintaining control of my body, but that I could no longer hold on to that. I felt like an entity behind my eyes was what I was really seeing out of, and I felt it slip back away from my body, falling backwards away from the controls so to speak. EMTs and my wife it up, so that's good I dunno. Story 42. Not my story, but a friend of mine was attacked by her ex-husband years ago and stabbed in the neck. She was bleeding out. She has told me that as she was lying in the hospital she felt no pain. It all went away. I see other people have written that too. It's almost a relief to know that a painful death may not be so painful after all. Story 43. I've had two friends who have been clinically dead. Both said they saw nothing. What surprised me is that they both were certain that this was evidence that there was nothing after death. Story 44. I was out for 2.5 minutes after cardiac arrest. Honestly, despite being a believer of a higher power, transition of consciousness, etc., I didn't really see anything. But then again, maybe my body wasn't out for long enough for my soul to try reaching out to another place, you know. Story 45. Things that looked like fish or eels floating around me. I was in space but yet moved as I was walking on something solid. I was then sat in a chair in a darkish room. A person in a suit sat across from me. There wasn't a verbal discussion but there was words. I won't go into details of what was all said. To sum it up, they were disappointed that I was trying to kill myself, that I needed to go back and finish. I woke up in my bed, my body evacuated itself. I could barely get out of bed let alone stand up. Fell down so many times, before calling for help on my phone.